Hello there. Today I'm taking a look at a hybrid grape variety. I was looking for something interesting to put into a tasting, and I found this in a wine shop. So this is Byrne's Northland Chambourcin. And I thought it'd be an interesting opportunity to talk about hybrid varieties that are used in winemaking, and Chambourcin is a hybrid variety. Northland, quite a small producing area, a couple of hours drive to the north of Auckland on the North Island of New Zealand's panhandle, as it's sometimes described. So Chambourcin is a hybrid variety. So what do we mean by hybrid? Hybrid isn't just a crossing of two grape varieties. It's a crossing of two grape varieties that come from different species. So normally, if we're talking about a crossing for a grape variety, we're talking about a crossing of two vitis vinifera grape varieties. So this is a crossing normally of a vitis vinifera variety with an American grape variety such as a vitis rupestris or vitis labrusca. And often this was done originally to try and use varieties that wouldn't be prone to phylloxera. And these days we tend to use American varieties, occasionally they're crossings, as being resistant to phylloxera as rootstocks. There are other advantages, however, in terms of the fact that some varieties, and Chambourcin's a good example of this, are both resistant to humidity in that they're not particularly susceptible to mildew. They have quite thick skins, so that they can be grown in more humid conditions than most vitis vinifera. They'll tolerate that, and also they're more tolerant of really cold climates. So you'll find in areas such as New York State or in places in Canada, hybrids can be planted for their resistance to frost. So I suppose they're quite good at mitigating extremes of climate. Chambourcin itself was actually a French created hybrid, and its origins are slightly unknown, but it's thought to be a crossing of an American variety with a crossing produced by the French vine breeder Albert Zébel. Zébel created pretty much all his hybrids from two vinifera varieties, Aramon and Alicante Bouschet, being crossed with another hybrid variety called Jaeger 70, and that was a crossing between a rupestris vine and a vitis incicilium vine. So one of the parents was a hybrid, including a hybrid in its parentage, and the other was an American vine. So there's quite a strong influence of American vines in Chambourcin's lineage, even though we're not exactly sure what it was. So the advantages that Chambourcin has is it gives good colour. Again, people aren't specific as to whether it was the Aramon or the Alicante Bouschet, which are the parent involved in the hybridisation with which the American vine that was the parent for Chambourcin was crossed. However, one would imagine that Alicante Bouschet being a Tenturier, that might actually mark it as being part of Chambourcin's lineage. As well as this, as I say, it's resistant to frost and mildew. Thus, in the United States, we find it growing in Missouri, Indiana, Michigan, Tennessee and Maryland, also in the eastern states of Pennsylvania and Virginia. It's also quite a widely travelled grape variety, so you'll see it in Australia. There are reasonable plantings in New South Wales, where it can be used to add colour to Syrah blends, but also I know that Darrenberg in the McLaren Vale produce a varietal Chambourcin. And a small amount of it grows in New Zealand, where particularly in the Auckland and Northland regions back in the 1960s and 1970s, there was quite a bit of encouragement to grow hybrid varieties because of their resistance to the humid climate that we have here. And considering that in the 60s and 70s, most of the production of red wines was actually of sweet fortified wines, hybrids seemed like quite a good option. These days, however, there are only about 4 hectares of Chambourcin remaining in New Zealand. I noticed some being produced in Hawke's Bay, but most of it up around Northland. Having originated in France, the variety is found in the Nantes region, so that's where we get Muscadet from. But being a hybrid, it's not allowed to be used in AOC production or even in IGT production, so it has to go into table wines, so it can only go into the cheapest and most basic wines. As I say, sometimes it's used to beef up the colour in Syrah. You can see it being used in making red sparkling wines, and I even spotted in our listings a red ice wine being made in New York State from Chambourcin. Now, this particular wine, the Byrne name refers to Ben Byrne, who's a winemaker who grew up in Northland around Keri Keri, which is where this is produced. And the fruit for this grew on the Finegorough Vineyard, which is just outside Keri Keri. And Keri Keri is where viticulture starts in New Zealand, when Samuel Marsden, just over 100 years ago, planted a small vineyard. It wasn't particularly auspicious because Marsden's vines were actually eaten by goats before they ever produced a crop, but this is where winemaking started in New Zealand. Now, I should apologise because I don't think there's any great availability of this wine, so I'm just using it as an example, really. I think Ben made this wine, as far as I can see, between about 2014, and this may actually be the last vintage, because in 2019 he takes over as the winemaker at a new winemaking venture, the Landings, which is just outside Keri Keri, which is producing some really interesting high quality Syrah. And I can't see many reviews for it, to be honest. I think the 2014 vintage was reviewed by Bob Campbell, Master of Wine, and he gave it an 89-point score. And Michael Cooper, an authority on New Zealand wines who writes mostly in New Zealand, rated the 2015 as establishing Ben Byrne as the best producer of Chambourcin in Northland, which is possibly not the most auspicious title, but suggests it was a decent wine. So what do I know about this wine? I believe, certainly going by previous vintages, it was fermented with indigenous yeasts. It's been aged in seasoned French oak barrels. And there's a suggestion, certainly about the 2015 vintage, that had been given extra body by copious lees stirring. So let's see what we think of the wine, shall we? Looking at it, I mean, 2018 for a wine that wasn't particularly expensive. I think I paid about 20 New Zealand dollars for this, so that would be less than 15 US dollars. The colour is quite deep and dark. It's not opaque. It's ruby red. It's starting to show a little bit of signs of age. It's starting to look a little brown at the edges, but not excessively so. It's a wine that's 6 years of age and hopefully should be fully mature now. So let's see what we make of the aroma, shall we? As expected, the aromas are developed. They're quite spicy. There's quite a rich, jammy note, almost a slight underlying meatiness, but it's rich, it's juicy. It's dark, slightly sort of bursting berry fruit. I think we're thinking about sort of ripe mulberries, ripe loganberries, things like that. On the palate, that's quite rich, smooth. There's a sort of a developed, slightly mushroom note. There's spiciness. There's a sort of rich, dark plum. There's enough acidity to lift the fruit, but in general, it's a fairly soft acidity, and there's a rounded alcohol on the back palate, giving a little bit of richness, along with fair body. It's medium to full bodied. The alcohol is at 13.5% according to the label. I mean, when I swirled it, there are still quite substantial tears forming on the side of the glass there. The flavours, those developed flavours, starting to get sort of hints of forest floor overlaying that sort of rich, slightly spicy mulberry, slightly developed plum, almost getting through to prune notes at the end there. Rich, it's jammy on the finish. The acidity is relatively soft, and that's not particularly lifting the finish, so you're getting that sort of more rounded, ripe plum to prune note on the finish. There's a little bit of spiciness, but it's coming from fruit. There's not a cedary note supporting it there. So aging in old oak has given it roundness rather than adding structure. I think it's a wine that's completely ready now. I think one thing it does do is that it doesn't particularly show any of the musky flavours that you sometimes get with hybrid varieties that I find can be quite off-putting. I mean, there is just this sort of slight meaty, slightly spicy note that's actually quite exciting and quite enjoyable. And I think this is just the tail end of the quite distinctive, some people refer to foxy flavours that you can get with hybrids, and this is not being marred in any way by that. A well-made wine, fully mature, probably more towards the end of its life. It's going to make some very enjoyable drinking. It's not a wine that's hugely exciting, but at the same time, it's not a wine that's demonstrating any of the downsides that you sometimes get with hybrids. The only kind of score I've seen against this is against the 2014, and that was that score of 89 from Bob Campbell. I think that may even be slightly on the generous side, but I think that's about right for it. This is just a well-made wine, but not one of huge complexity. So I think that limits any score it's going to get to that sort of level. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the taste. If you've enjoyed the video, do please press the like button. If you've got any comments, please leave those in the comments box below. If you'd like to sign up to our channel and follow us, that would be fantastic to gain your support there. If you have friends you think might like to watch the video, do please forward it to them. That would be fantastic. I will, of course, leave a link in the notes below to our page for Byrne Northland Chambourcin. There's not an awful lot of information there, but just for your reference. Thank you again for watching, and do please try and take some time and come and join us for another tasting in the very near future, won't you? Thanks again. Bye for now.